Good morning. Welcome. I want to welcome all of you to the Boston Foundation. My name is Terry Lane. I'm Vice President for Program here at the Foundation. And for those of you who have been here before, welcome back. For those of you, I hope there are only a few who have not been here before. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Foundation. We are the Community Foundation for Greater Boston, and I think you probably all know us well for our grant-making history, but we also are a convener. We bring people together to talk about some of the major issues in the community. And as part of both of these roles, we run some special initiatives that focus us on some of the big issues in our area. One of these is the Community Safety Initiative that's been going on for the last 3 years. And over the last 3 years, we've distributed $1.5 million worth of grants. And in addition, we've held 5 forums like the one we're having today. This is the 6th in the series. All of the other forums have led to further discussion and action on topics ranging from quarry reform to better services for girls who are involved with the criminal justice system. But today's forum is a little bit different. We're going to move away from specific action areas in criminal justice, and we're going to look at how the general public thinks about issues related to crime and criminal justice practices. And we're also going to take a look at how the public's priorities compare with current policies and practices. We're going to hear that there are some great disparities there, and that the public is open to more investment in rehabilitation and education for those who are incarcerated than is currently the case. What we've learned from this survey is that people are more open to change than one might think. This means that the public wants to see offenders able to return to their communities prepared for productive lives. This is very significant because, for example, as the region loses population, labor shortages will be met when all of our citizens have opportunities to participate in the economy. Let me just tell you a little bit about how we're going to conduct this morning's event. The first thing we're going to do is present an overview of the survey findings. Then we're going to have a moderated panel discussion about the implications of the results. And then there will be time for questions. We will wrap up by 10:30. So before we move into the program, I just want to recognize a few of the public officials who have given some of their precious time to joining us this morning. Senator Barrios is here. He's going to be a member of our panel. Secretary of Public Safety Ed Flynn has joined us. And Essex County District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett. In addition, there are a number of other public officials and staff, and we welcome all of you here today. So let's get into the program. We are indebted to the Crime and Justice Institute for this work. They have been working with Doble Research Associates to conduct and interpret the public opinion survey. And I'm going to turn first to Elise Clausen, Executive Director of CJI, who will present the survey findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and thank all of you for coming today. I'd also like to thank the Boston Foundation for supporting this effort. We were very much interested in doing this public opinion survey, and actually, I think one of the things that gave rise to it was during this whole public safety series when we were talking about reentry, both with officials who were dealing with reentry and then had a focus group with offenders. I think Reverend Hammond actually said, but we kind of know what to do, but we don't know what the public thinks or whether or not they would support any of the things that we think make sense. And so in some ways that's where this idea came from. So I really appreciate the Boston Foundation's willingness to support this endeavor. I also want to thank the Department of Corrections and Parole, and both the Commissioner and the Chair are here today for providing us data and for their staff being willing to take our many phone calls and emails. And I'd also like to thank the advisory board who has guided us really from the very beginning, both individually and collectively when they came together in meetings, to make sure that we did this in a very scientific way and that we really tested the things that we thought policymakers needed to know. And again, the other person I would very much like to thank is Cheryl Roberts. She took the lead on this project. She is Director of Research and Policy for CJI. and she's done a tremendous job on this work, and she's very precise, as some of you who have worked with her know. And she's also reminded me that as I go through this presentation that I need to be precise, which means that it's maybe a less lively kind of presentation than you might sometimes have, because it's really important that I give you not only the correct words, in some cases I'm actually saying what it is what question we actually asked, and then giving you very specific percentages around what people have said. So I really, appreciate that you'll be willing to listen to that. We approached the Boston Foundation, in 2003 to do this for the reasons that I suggested, and I'm going to take you through the highlights of the survey. One of the things I would encourage you to do at your leisure is read the report, which will give you more details on some of the specifics that came out of the survey, and it also, at the back of the report, actually has the questions that were asked. Whenever it's reasonable, you can take a look at that, because I think people are always interested in what the questions actually are. Before I get into the details of the survey, I want to give you a little bit of context in terms of where we are in terms of policy in Massachusetts, and also some of the things we were actually trying to test. And some of the things we were trying to test are some evidence-based practices or things that we know from research that actually makes a difference in terms of reducing the likelihood that people will continue to commit crime once they leave an institution. Since the 1980s, Massachusetts has been a part of a national trend in fighting crime that focuses on enforcement, increased incarceration, and longer sentences, including mandatory minimums, especially mandatory minimums for drug crimes. During this time, prison incarceration rates in Massachusetts have tripled. In the 1990s, some of those changes in sentencing laws and practices reduced inmates' eligibility for parole, and more prisoners were released without parole supervision and transitional services, including some of the most high risk of those inmates. There's about 20,000 people who are released annually in Massachusetts. About two-thirds of those come from houses of corrections or jails, and the others come from prisons. About 1 in 5 report having an immediate family member in the state. 1 in 5 people report having an immediate family member who has ever been to jail or prison, which is a little higher than I think we may have expected. As policymakers weigh options for system reform, an important dimension to consider is what is the perspective of the public? Because after all, as policymakers, we are trying to represent that public. The study objectives were to understand the views of Massachusetts and Boston residents about criminal justice policy, and to include with that sentencing, corrections, and prisoner reintegration. Those were the focus areas that we tried to pay attention to. We were also trying to test the support, as I mentioned, for evidence-based practices. Now, certainly we could not test the support for all of those, but we tried to test support for some of them that we know make some difference in terms, again, of reducing recidivism for those who are reentering. Just a very brief background on evidence-based practices, and evidence-based practices, if you're really talking about that, is a day-long presentation, and this is going to be about 3 minutes. So I'm just going to give you a flavor of it. There are a number of definitions, but ultimately we tried to come up with sort of a 2-line definition, and that is evidence-based principles are based on scientifically tested methods for achieving definable and measurable outcomes. And that's one of the significant differences from terms like best practices, which may have outcomes but may not necessarily have very specific ones and definable measures. Also, the research that's been done on this, that's come up with this set of evidence-based principles, has been done by researchers who have no vested interest in the outcome and who have also looked at the research to make sure the research meets really good research protocol so that they feel like they have some comfort in that research. Some of what the research has found is that supervisions and interventions need to focus on higher risk offenders and based on objective assessment tools. And objective assessment tools have 2 parts, really. One is sort of static factors, which are things like age at first arrest and your criminal history and current crime kinds of things. And then what we call more dynamic features, which are really, the term we use is criminogenic needs, but they're really those criminal risk factors that tend to drive criminal risk and can either elevate or decrease your risk depending on what those are. And it's those dynamic factors that the research has shown, if you can really target your interventions to higher risk offenders and target their primary criminal risk factors, that you can reduce the chances of their recidivism quite significantly. The research has also told us something that I think is sort of counterintuitive, and that is that if we provide significant treatment or supervision and involve lower risk people more in the criminal justice system, we increase their recidivism. We make them worse. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as policymakers to do no harm, and certainly we don't want to increase the likelihood that people are going to commit more crime. Part of the reason that occurs is as you take relatively lower risk people and get them further penetrated into the criminal justice system, there's a contamination effect. Essentially what you're doing is increasing their contact with higher risk, more criminal personalities, and so that becomes more their peer group in a sense, and they tend to commit further crimes. The last thing on evidence-based practices is just to give you a very small amount of data. Criminal sanctions alone, so if you just punish someone and do not provide any kind of treatment or any kind of intervention to reduce their criminal risks, tends to increase recidivism by about 7%. If you use inappropriate treatment, and there's a long list of things that tend to work and don't work, but if you use inappropriate treatment or some traditional treatment, by the way, for substance abuse or mental health, is very, very good for pro-social people. But for anti-social people, if you're using inappropriate treatment and using it with the wrong people, you actually also can increase their recidivism. If you use what we call non-targeted treatment, it meets evidence-based principles in the sense that it's cognitively based, it requires practice, it deals with the appropriate kinds of criminogenic needs, but it's not well targeted or matched to the right individual, even then can get up to about a 13% decrease in recidivism. On the other hand, if you have really solid treatment that is targeted on higher risk offenders and intervenes with 3 or more of their top criminal risk factors, we're seeing up to 30% reductions in their recidivism. And that's really significant, and there's been some work that's compared that with medical treatment, and it compares very favorably. In fact, some of the medical scientists who've looked at this have said this is really pretty phenomenal kind of results. The study methodology, we held 2 focus groups in Greater Boston, one in the city and one in the suburbs. There was a telephone survey of 748 people, 411 in Massachusetts generally, and 337 in Boston. The sampling error was 4.8 for Massachusetts and 5.3 for Boston. The focus groups were each about 3 hours. And the purpose of the focus groups is really to explore people's thinking in depth, and which helps then design the telephone interview questionnaire, because we want to make sure that we're using terms that people can understand, for one thing. And then the questionnaire is also tested before it's actually gone out in terms of the larger survey. We wanted to oversample Boston, partly because we wanted to be able to see how much difference there was in Boston versus the state as a whole. It also allowed us, with this sampling technique, to get some sense of minority communities and where there may be differences there, which we thought were important. The first thing that is a priority for residents in fighting crime is prevention and rehabilitation. They see that as their top priority. So when they were asked what their top priority is, they said that 2/3 of them said that they wanted prevention and rehabilitation, and that the state's top crime reduction priorities should be that, and that was opposed to longer sentences or more prison. And you can see in these bars, the light green bars show the views of Americans as a whole. One of the things we tried to do is we took some questions out of a national survey that's been done so that we could actually match to see what differences there were between Massachusetts residents and the national survey. As you can see, 64% or two-thirds of Massachusetts residents want to focus on the underlying causes of crime by improving things like job and vocational training, providing family counseling, or, for example, rather than focusing on just strict punishment. And most people in Massachusetts and in Boston say that illegal drug use is the #1 crime problem and that they see the war on drugs as a failure by a margin of about 2-1. Boston residents were more likely than state residents as a whole to say that violent crime is their biggest crime problem. About 27% of Boston residents felt that violent crime was their most important crime problem, and only 14% of the state residents. We also asked folks about their views on sentencing and how they thought convicted offenders should be sentenced. When they were asked which is the best way for judges to sentence convicted offenders, residents were very divided between letting judges decide the punishment on a case-by-case basis, 47% felt that way, versus having judges use sentencing guidelines, 41%, which really indicates there's a fair amount of work to do, I think, and dialogue around what would sentencing guidelines offer versus a case-by-case judgment. But also shown in the chart, only 9% of Massachusetts residents support mandatory minimum sentencing, with 88% against them. And that's one of these areas that, as Terry mentioned, there's a huge gap between the current policy in Massachusetts and what residents think. I mean, to have an 88% of the public feel that mandatory minimums are not the right way to sentence is pretty significant when you consider the sort of battles legislatively around mandatory minimums. There's also an opposition to mandatory minimum sentences specifically around drugs, and it's important to know that this particular thing was consistent, we checked this, across political party, age, race, and even if the respondent or a close family member had been a recent victim of crime. So it crosses all parts of our population that are opposed to mandatory minimums, and particularly, again, when it's mandatory minimums for drug offenses. Over 3/4 of the residents want judges to have the latitude to impose mandatory drug treatment rather than a mandatory term of imprisonment. So I think, and as we go through the rest of the studies, you'll see that they're very interested in treating drug offenders in particular. We also asked residents about their views on prisons. And I would step back just a second and say that Massachusetts residents generally have a fair amount of confidence in their criminal justice system, and also think that the people who work in their criminal justice system are working very hard and have the public's interests at heart. I mean, they're quite supportive of people working in the criminal justice system, and that's not necessarily true always. So I think those of you who are here need to know that. Massachusetts residents are skeptical, however, that prisons rehabilitate, with only about 34% saying they do so, either somewhat or very successfully. And an equal number who say that it's somewhat or very unsuccessful. So they're really divided in terms of whether or not they think that prisons make much difference in terms of rehabilitation. But there's a solid majority of Massachusetts residents, 58%, say that released offenders are actually more likely to commit new crimes after serving time because they've been hardened by their experience. 16% feel that inmates are less likely to commit a new crime after release, with 26% saying they don't know. So again, 58% feel that when people are released from prison or some kind of incarceration, that they're going to be more likely to commit new crime. They also talked a little bit about what they think are the priorities for the prison system. They see prison as a missed opportunity to change behavior, and they support a variety of measures that they feel might help reduce future crime. Over 80% say that it is very important to provide drug and alcohol treatment to prisoners. That's a huge margin. A large majority of state residents also want to require that prisoners take classes, do work, and receive job training. Less than half of the residents feel that it is very important to keep prisoners in strict conditions without programming so that serving time is tough. Finally, the survey also explored residents' views on many issues related to prisoner reintegration after release, including parole and post-prison supervision. And I'll talk to you a little bit. The difference of parole, as we were going through the survey, has to do with early release versus supervision after completing a full sentence. So we'll get into that in a second. As shown by the bar chart on your left, 78% of Massachusetts residents favor the early release of selected nonviolent prison inmates. However, the majority of state residents want violent offenders, 57% of violent offenders, to complete their full prison term, and 74% want sex offenders, in particular, to complete their full prison term and to not be eligible for any kind of early release. But they're clearly open by a significant majority to early release for nonviolent offenders. 80%, if you look at the chart on the right, 80% of Massachusetts residents feel that preparing inmates for release by moving them through gradations of less secure confinement through work release, halfway houses, for example, would be fairly effective or very effective in substantially reducing crime. They are also quite vocal and pretty clear about what they think offenders need on parole, which, by the way, is not surprising because most of us who are in this business would say they need the same things that the community members feel like. They do not want parolees released into community without support or supervision. The vast majority say it's very important to provide mandatory treatment for parolees with drug problems. 83% said that. This drug treatment piece comes out over and over again in the survey. 78% think they need help finding a job, 75% think they need strict supervision, and 63% feel that they need help finding housing. 90% of state residents also favor providing released prisoners who are not on parole with job training and placement. I think there was a huge recognition by the public that people coming out of incarcerative settings need support and supervision if they're going to make it in the community. Even for inmates who have served their entire sentence, 91% of residents would like offenders released from maximum security prisons to be supervised after their release, which you can see in the chart. However, when they were asked about who should the Commonwealth focus on, a majority of these residents favor focusing post-release supervision on those released prisoners who are most likely to commit new crimes rather than supervising all former prisoners. So if you have to make a choice, they really see that it's important to focus on those who are at greatest risk of continuing to commit crime. The survey also asked residents what to do about parolees who violate conditions of their parole, which is also, I think, very interesting data. Massachusetts residents want to penalize parole violators using a range of sanctions that are proportional to the violation. They do not support automatic reincarceration. And we asked them a series of specific questions. If a parolee fails a drug test for the first time, the vast majority of residents want the parolee to receive a sanction in the community. If you look at the chart, 41% of residents feel that a warning, closer supervision, is appropriate sanction. 40% feel that halfway house or house arrest would be appropriate, while 17% support reincarceration. I think that the public has figured out that drug offenders have a substance abuse problem and clearly feel like some treatment is in order. Residents also want parolees to receive varying levels of sanctions in the community instead of reincarceration for violations ranging from missing a meeting with a parole officer to failing a drug test for the first time or the second time to shoplifting $100 worth of merchandise. Those were the kinds of things that we tested to see how they would respond in terms of having a community sanction versus reincarceration. They also want to focus on what works. Some of the overarching themes that were related to prison reentry are that by a 5-to-1 margin, 75% to 15%, Massachusetts residents say education, job training, and drug treatment, etc., have probably saved money and keep people out of prison. Large majorities, 69% in Massachusetts and 77% in Boston, say we need to spend more on programs proven to reduce recidivism, even if it means a tax increase, which I thought was kind of an unusual finding, that people are actually willing to pay some additional resources for this. Nearly two-thirds, 64% of Massachusetts residents say the state should do a lot more to reduce the chances that released offenders will commit new crimes. In sum, people are eager for change. They want to concentrate on preventing crime and providing more job training and vocational education. They feel that drug and alcohol treatment should be required and that people should also be able to take classes, work, and receive job training. They think that Parolees may need mandatory drug treatment and strict supervision and help in finding things like jobs and places to live. They want to eliminate mandatory minimum sentences, especially for drug crimes, and they want to redirect resources to reduce recidivism. Massachusetts' views are broadly consistent with the direction of national public opinion on criminal justice policy issues. National research shows that the public's views have evolved since the criminal justice reforms of the 90s. The public is now seeking, I think, a more balanced approach to crime rather than focusing exclusively on punishment and long prison sentences. Nationally and in Massachusetts, the public wants a multi-pronged approach to crime that prioritizes prevention and treatment, and they are willing to invest in this approach if they think it will reduce crime. Finally, the public opinion survey, I think, points out substantial gaps between public priorities and current policies, from whether it's mandatory minimums or resource allocation for prevention and treatment and rehabilitative programs that are designed specifically to reduce reoffending. I hope you find this research somewhat interesting. I think that the majority's viewpoints in some areas are pretty startling. I mean, they're not just, very slight majorities. They're pretty significant in at least some of these areas. At this point, I would like to introduce Bob Gittens, who is our moderator, and invite the panelists to please come up and take their seats. And I want to thank all of you panelists for taking the time today to be with us and debate these issues. Bob? Bob is the Vice President for Public Affairs at Northeastern University, and in his capacity as Vice President, he oversees the university's interactions with federal, state, and local government. He also is a representative to the surrounding communities of Northeastern University. He has a broad background, I think, in criminal justice issues, healthcare, and public education. I'm sure that Bob is not a stranger to anyone in this room, so thank you, Bob. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Elise.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A round of applause for Elise. Thank you. If I could invite the panelists to come up and take their seats. And let me say good morning to everyone. It is great to see everybody here, and we have a number of folks here, all of you who have been very involved in issues of criminal justice and public safety. And I want to thank Elise and everyone for putting together the presentation and for presenting this very important and significant research. This morning we've assembled an exemplary panel of experts to help us explore in greater depth two areas that come from the research that you've just heard. We're going to look at two areas: prisoner reentry, and that'll include treatment and post-release supervision. And I'll also ask the panel to explore and talk a little bit about mandatory minimum sentencing. Our panelists bring a wealth of experience and involvement in criminal justice and public safety issues. They've all been very thoughtful leaders in the dialogue over the years about the issues that we're talking about this morning. So it's my pleasure to work with them and have an opportunity to introduce them. I'm going to begin at my far right and introduce first Senator Jared Barrios. Senator Barrios is the Democratic State Senator representing Cambridge, Chelsea, Everett, Charlestown, and parts of Alston, Brighton, Revere, Saugus, and Somerville. He serves as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, and he's also had extensive experience working with law enforcement and community leaders to prevent and to prosecute crime. His aggressive oversight of state government agencies has led to positive reforms in public safety agencies, including the creation of the new Department of Forensic Services. The committee on which he serves also led to the creation of the Harshbarger Commission on Correction Reform, which he now serves as a member. To his left is District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett of Essex County. District Attorney Blodgett was elected to his first term in November of 2002 and took his oath of office in January of 2003. During his first year in office, the District Attorney has worked in collaboration with the superintendents on the North Shore with their roundtable to establish a series of educational forums for educators and law enforcement to try to ensure safer schools and communities. He has helped to spearhead Project Safe Neighborhood, which targets violent gang members for prosecution, sweeping drugs and firearms off the streets. The district attorney is also, before taking office, he spent 15 years in private practice as a partner in a Peabody law firm, and prior to that worked for 18 months as an assistant district attorney in Suffolk County, in Essex County. To his left is Ms. Rita Poussin-Nethersole. She is Assistant Dean of Graduate Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Rita's been with the University of UMass since 1984 and has served as Assistant Dean of Graduate Studies since 1996. She's a resident of Roxbury and is involved in a number of important community activities, including her serving as the co-chair of the Grove Hall Safe Neighborhood Initiative, which is located in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And she's also on the board of directors of Project Right, also in Dorchester, Massachusetts. To her left is Lou DiNatale. He is the director of the Center for... I'm sorry, I skipped Jack. Sorry about that. Well, we've only met for the first time. Jack and I have known each other for a long time. I apologize. Jack Cinquegrana is the leader of Choate Hall and Stewart's Government Enforcement and Compliance Practice Group. He's a veteran trial lawyer with more than 20 years of experience in both federal and state government prosecution. He currently serves as the president-elect of the Boston Bar Association. He was recently appointed to the American Bar Association 9-member Criminal Justice Standards Committee, and that committee monitors and updates and implements the American Bar Association standards for criminal justice. He served for more than a decade as an assistant district attorney. He has served as assistant U.S. attorney, and finally he also has served as a chief trial counsel in the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, where he and I had the pleasure of working together. He was a member of the Boston Bar Association's Task Force on Justice and Special Committee on Sentencing Legislation, which drafted the legislation creating the Massachusetts Sentencing Commission. To Jack's left is Lou DiNatale, and he is the director of the Center for Economic and Civic Opinion and the executive director of Public Affairs at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. Mr. DiNatale directed the UMass poll that covers Massachusetts political and policy issues, and he's an expert in public opinion research. He's a well-known commentator and political analyst who was widely interviewed in the media on various public policy issues. To his left is Mr. John Larrabee. John is the Chief Executive Officer of Community Resources for Justice, which is a 127-year-old nonprofit organization based in Boston, Massachusetts, which serves to conduct research, public education, and technical assistance programs in criminal justice policy and practice. CRJ also provides residential and day services to adult offenders, troubled youth, and mentally retarded and developmentally disabled individuals, helping them to live civil and productive lives. John is the president and the founding member of the Citizens for Juvenile Justice, and a member of the board of the Massachusetts Council of Human Service Providers, and a past president of the International Community Corrections Association. So as I mentioned, we have a terrific panel to help us explore these issues. And to get started, I wanted to focus a little bit on what we heard in Elise's presentation about what the survey results were telling us about where the public is on some of these issues. What we heard is that the public seems to be far apart from policymakers on a number of issues involving crime and punishment. They've asked us, or think that we should be focusing on the causes of crime, focusing on treatment, on ways to rehabilitate offenders, rather than on longer sentences. Our public policy, as it's been implemented, has focused on longer terms of incarceration. So I'd like to turn the first question to Senator Barrios and ask him, the public, are they soft on crime?
I'm soft in the head. I can't. Is this off?
No, it's on.
This is
it's
on?
Working.
I don't need to switch anything. All right. Well, Bob, that's a bit of a loaded question. I have always have enormous respect for my constituents' thoughts, and especially when they agree with me. The politicians and administration officials will often take their cues from the public, understand the public at the local level to want to see tough policies on crime. I think the public's aspiration is to be tough on crime, and it's a little more nuanced than perhaps we at first understand what being tough on crime is. I think what the public wants us to be, in addition to being tough on crime, is tough on the causes of crime. Because what that means is getting underneath this question, and we're exploring it a little bit today, in recidivism and reoffending. But there are other avenues that we could explore. I don't think that we're on docket today. Services that we could provide to young people to prevent offending in the first place. Stuff that we can do before, when young people maybe offend, but before they get involved with the criminal justice system. Some of the diversion programs that folks like the district attorney here have been pioneering in Essex County and other places. And then there's that third piece, the recidivism piece. Getting tough on crime means getting tough on those causes too. The public, at least according to the public opinion surveys we've been presented with today, I think wants to see that because they want to see fewer victims. They want to see our tax dollars spent better. And all of those things really need to be brought to the fore in a campaign, in an effort to reform or refocus our policy efforts, in my opinion.
Good. Thank you very much. Mr. District Attorney, how does that question look from your perspective? This, what appears to be a gap between the public's view and what we do.
I think the public does not get enough credit for being savvy when it comes to issues of crime and what causes crime. In my experience, I think that people really understand that we have to change our way of thinking and way of doing business. I'm heartened by this survey. I think it shows that people, for the most part, really get it, that we can't continue to have a revolving door when it comes to incarceration of people who are drug and alcohol addicted, that we have 83% of the public survey believes that we need to have more resources, more effort in rehabilitating people. I think that's just terrific because from my vantage point as district attorney, that revolving door just is not going to end until we finally start to think outside the box. So I'm happy with that, and I think that most of the district attorneys in this state really want to roll up their sleeves and get involved in doing things in terms of prevention and rehabilitation, education. I say this all the time. Prosecution should be the measure of last resort in most circumstances in cases that we prosecute.
Rita, could I ask you, somebody who's very involved at the community and neighborhood level, how this question or the answer to it looks to you?
Well, the soft on crime, again, it's a loaded issue, and I think the answer is if tough on crime means the sort of stereotypically macho, slap leather, go ahead, make my day kind of approach to criminal justice, yeah, we're soft on crime. But I think the truth is that the public has a much more holistic sense about crime than anybody else. I think that we live it. When people talk about recidivism, I can think of 5 people on my block who are back. So I think that it's this holistic perspective that the public brings to the table. I think that as a community resident, being hard on crime doesn't mean just being hard on a criminal. It means being harder on a lot of variables.
Thank you. A couple of you have mentioned that the question that I posed was a loaded question, and we knew it was a loaded question. But it does raise the question about how do we bridge this gap. If the research is telling us that rehabilitation and treatment is what works, and the public is saying in the survey that's what works, and our public policies in terms of how we've implemented them don't seem to align with that. How do we bridge that gap? And I guess I'd ask it first from an historical perspective, looking back at how we've reached this point over the years, and maybe ask Lou if he could talk a little bit about how we've come to that point and how it looks from an historical perspective.
Well, first, these aren't surprising to me. I've been looking at these kinds of numbers. The numbers really aren't that surprising. I've taken a look at these numbers for a couple of decades. We worked together, 10 years ago. And the same, basically, the public does have a much more reasonable attitude towards crime than the folks running the criminal justice system and the politicians who are running for office. And I think you have to separate that. When you say public, you have to separate the public from the voters, because not all of the public are voters. And voter attitudes aren't necessarily public attitudes, although they often, in this case, they actually track similarly. All right, so you have a whole series of problems in how issues are used. on the human service side of the question, no matter how you cut it historically, if you ask people, do you want to raise taxes to help children, they say yes. People don't say no. You want to help raise taxes to help, make sure prisoners don't go back to jail and commit crimes? Your standard answer is going to be yes. But that's not how it plays out in real life. Okay, in real life, when you're actually confronted with the choice of raising taxes or no, and particularly in Massachusetts, health care. I mean, forget helping prisoners. Think about health care and trying to get a general population that agrees that everybody should be covered with health care actually get that bill passed. So, you have a whole series of real problems, and I have to say, it's just, it's easy to be tough on crime because you only have to be soft once, and the media will kill you. Okay, and that's why the internals, that's why the enforcers won't take chances. Even if it's an 80% sure bet, the 20% will get you fired someday if you're a DA or not elected. Okay, and so part of it is it's just easier. Okay, regardless of what the research is, it's safe. Okay, and frankly, we're running up against big national. If we ask people what are the most important issues, crime isn't on the top list anymore. And when it was, it's get tough on it. The only reason we're talking about it now, and there's even some public attitude, is that it's not really on the. People don't really feel pressed by crime right now. I'm sure Boston, urban areas, you'll get a bigger kick, but as a statewide issue, doesn't make it right now. Massachusetts has, and we've got the historical institutionalized, deinstitutionalized, institutionalized, deinstitutionalized, and the truth of the matter is Massachusetts prisons, unless you put in about as much money, okay, as the Big Dig, you've got serious facility problems. So I think we're going to go into a deinstitutional stage for very practical reasons. They're not going to want to build more prisons or pay to put more prisons in. So there may be an opportunity for programs, recidivism, appetites. But if you had to talk about what happened in the last 10 years, they'd say crime came off the number one issues in the 80s and 90s because they locked them up and threw away the key.
I'd actually ask Jack the next question in a similar vein. As somebody who is not only served many years as a frontline prosecutor, but has for a number of years been involved in the policy debate around a number of these issues, and in your current role with the Boston Bar Association will play a role in advocacy on a number of issues. How does that historical perspective look for you as somebody who's been engaged in that debate, including some of the legislative issues that have flowed from that?
I guess I would offer two themes. First, what I see is that sometimes the best intentions don't result in what I would think of as appropriate consequences. For example, 25, 30 years ago, we had the Rockefeller drug laws in New York, recently repealed or cut back. We had, in the 80s, the federal sentencing guidelines, which were aimed at reducing disparity in sentencing, but instead got hijacked, I think, by this sort of tough-on-crime rhetoric and ended up packing the federal prison system with 60% drug offenders who are serving first-time offenses that are incredibly long. Our own truth in sentencing bill in Massachusetts in '94 was passed for the intended purpose of creating transparency in sentencing after years of indeterminate sentencing when someone might receive a 20-year Concord sentence but only serve a year. But one result of the truth in sentencing process was we now have each participant in the system distrusting the next participant's discretion. So, for example, when we tried to establish sentencing where a judge could set parole for, say, a 6 to 9 sentence, you'd get a 6-year sentence and be paroled for 3. Judges now give sentences of 6 to 6 in a day because they don't trust the next participant in the process to exercise appropriate discretion. So the first point I'd make is that a lot of these well-intended efforts have unintended consequences. And the second point, picking up on what Lou says, is I think we've almost settled on a paradigm for passing sentencing legislation which can be best exemplified by Melanie's bill. You find an issue, you find an appealing victim, you press the legislature against the press to adopt yet another mandatory sentencing bill. We have another one now for drunk driving offenses. And so it's an episodic reaction or approach to creating sentencing policy. For all these reasons, we're not invested in a systematic approach from sentencing through post-release in doing this in an organized way.
Thank you. What we heard this morning was research that tells us that the public supports the idea of treatment and rehabilitation, particularly for drug offenders. We know that 80% of offenders serving time have a history of substance abuse, and that drug treatment tends to be effective in reducing recidivism. And yet, in terms of where we have focused our resources, we've not gone in that direction. So I guess, John, to ask you to look at the question of, number one, should we focus more on treatment and reentry programs? And, you know, what's the best way to move that forward, to get that addressed?
Okay. The answer to the first question, I think, is yes.
Okay.
If anyone has to debate that, if anyone wants to debate that, I'll be happy to do that next. But I think in terms of how we do that is going to be very difficult, because we've gone through a stage of 20-odd years, maybe 25 years, of shifting resources from treatment and recidivism reduction and community corrections into being more controlling, both in terms of prisons as well as in the community. And to me, it begins back in the late 80s with the Willie Horton incident, and I now have come to the stage in life where some people don't know who that is. In fact, weren't even around when Willie Horton occurred. But it was a major event, not only in Massachusetts but nationally, and because it played into a presidential campaign, it swept the country as well. And so what we did is we did away with a lot of programs that not only did we think were well designed and well operated, but indeed research and evidence gave us good results on it, that furlough programs were reducing crime, that pre-release programs were reducing crime, and one bad incident resulted in throwing that away. And someone earlier had mentioned that's an easy shift to make, because it's the one bad incident, and there were, I don't know how many tens of thousands of furloughs in the heyday of the furlough program, and the failure rate was well below 1%. And I'm not talking about a horrendous crime failure, but simply someone not returning. And then then you could probably count on one hand the number of heinous crimes that occurred on a furlough. So that one little incident, and maybe a couple of others, resulted in us walking away from that. It caught along with the mandatory sentencing, reduction in parole rates. So we had more and more people going to prison, more and more people spending longer times in prison, and either consciously or unconsciously decisions about shifting resources from recidivism reduction that we talk about today and community programs and treatment services into security and custody. Simply because of overcrowding. We took classrooms in prisons and made them dormitories. As the budgets didn't keep pace with the influx of inmates, we dropped teachers and added custodial staff. Parole didn't need to be funded. We weren't using it, so the parole budgets get cut. And now we come to the stage where we're thinking about parole as an opportunity to reduce recidivism, an opportunity to think about how and supervise and manage the transition from prison to the community, and we don't have a parole system to do that. It's at a very low ebb in its history. Shifting that back is going to be difficult, very practical. We could talk about closing a prison and taking those dollars and putting that into a reentry system, an infrastructure of services that bring people back to the community and manage them safely. It isn't going to happen overnight. So it's a difficult thing to make. The good news, I think the focus on recidivism reduction, the post-release supervision legislation, the reentry legislation, the debate is all talking about recidivism reduction. And believing that you get what you measure, if we start holding corrections, the general correction system, accountable for recidivism reduction, we'll probably see some gains on that and some of those tough budget decisions being made on that. Whereas in the past, if someone committed a crime in the community, it would be the parole board who worried, was the person on parole, or the probation department worrying, was the person on probation. The prison system didn't worry, unless it was an escapee. because they weren't responsible for recidivism reduction. They were responsible to hold on to this guy or woman until the last day of the sentence. So if we can start to get more of the system worried about, interested in, and being held responsible for recidivism reduction, start to see a shift in resources.
Okay. District Attorney Blodgett, your thoughts about how we can bridge this gap?
Oh, wow. Well, I could bring Maureen Walsh up here. She's trying to hide up back there, chairperson of the parole board. Spent about 2 days talking about that. But I think John's absolutely right. We have to start to shift our thinking. And that's one thing I've seen as I conclude that my last year, my first term as district attorney. One of the things I'd just like to touch on, which I thought was very fascinating in the survey, and opened my eyes, was the percentage in terms of the issue of housing. That we don't focus enough. We talk about the rehabilitation, vocational training, but I walk almost every day from my office in Salem to Superior Court, and I have to walk by the district court in Salem to do that. And I see people, the same people there all the time. And many of those people, and I've talked to a couple, and one was a former client when I was a defense attorney. I asked him, I said, Rich, what are you doing? He says, well, this is all I know. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But he has no place to go. He has no place to live. And if we're going to get serious about changing people's behavior, about modification, we have to provide housing for people who are coming back into society. Obviously, we have to provide job training and rehabilitation. But that's just such a simple, in my way of thinking, component to how we can start to really, build and bridge the gap. How we can certainly do something to give people some self-respect and self-esteem. Frank Cousins, the sheriff in Essex County, is a very good friend of mine, created what's called the Women in Transition, WIT. And I go up there once in a while, and you see women who are starting to become reacclimated back into society. And some of these women have never had their own room, their own bedroom. Mm-hmm. And they're so proud of the fact they now have a room where they can set up something that's their own. And such a simple step, but we just don't do that in society. And, I mean, I just have so many thoughts on this issue, and I'm not going to dominate the conversation, but as district attorney, I want to see more of that as opposed to just, again, having these people go through the system time and time and time again. And I'm willing to go out on the limb and do that.
I think the examples you just gave are similar to what the public would say they feel is what would work. From what we've seen in the survey and from the research, it suggests that that's what's effective. Senator, how do we begin to look at how we begin to advance some of these? At the risk of being the skunk at the garden party, I am going to challenge. I withdraw the question. No, do not withdraw the question. It's too late. Ms. Clausen, who presented earlier today, who's one of my role models in terms of what she does in public service, what she did in Oregon and what she does here, I want to suggest that if we get underneath, to prevent the sort of backlash that we saw in the 80s and early 90s, the switch, especially in Massachusetts with the switch administrations in 90 and, that famous quote, I want to introduce prisoners to the joys of busting rocks, and this whole paradigm shift. I think that we have to understand that when we talk about programs, that it's very important how we talk about programs. If you ask the public what you think of parole, not supervised post-sentence supervision, but parole, there's a real understanding of parole is, they got out early. And the public doesn't always like that. But they do like to know that when prisoners get out, there's some sort of ongoing supervision. So how we talk about what it is very important. So now, shifting gears for a second, we're talking about drug treatment. That was one of the things you mentioned in the litany of things that we want to see. I think there's a way that you can talk about drug treatment that is from a longer-term perspective, more viable, more sustainable in the public and political arena. One example I want to give you that I'm very familiar with are the drug courts that are in my district. I have a couple of them in my district. They are very structured forms of folks getting out, or in the case of drug court, I guess, not going in, but sort of an alternative sentence, if you will, participating in a very structured, rigorous program. That kind of program, I think, will withstand public scrutiny when they look at, this person's not out. They didn't get out. They're doing something which is involved with the criminal justice system. And I don't think can be described, very difficult to describe as somebody not paying a penalty, if you will. If drug treatment is just somebody getting out on parole and, they have to talk to, do a urine test once a month or something, that's not
the same thing. And I think we'll get, when that one bad case comes up, we'll get the kind of public scrutiny which will result in reactive public policy. So I'm only sort of being the skunk here at the garden party to say how we describe what it is and the kind of conditions that we put on it. It really must remain within the criminal justice system. So to use the DA's example of housing, I think if we go out there, we're going to do a housing program for all ex-offenders. What we're going to get is say, well, wait a minute, what about all these Section 8 folks that we're having to cut off the rolls? Why should prisoners get it when the working poor can't? If, however, it's a program that's part of, sort of part of post-sentence supervision, part of a program that's aimed at making sure these people don't reoffend, and it's sort of in a halfway house is different than housing, right, than housing we're giving to folks. Then I think maybe it's sort of structurally viable in the long term in public policy when we're making difficult budget choices. So I just want to make that point. How we describe it and remaining within the context of a criminal justice program is very important in any of these things.
So the combination of, as Elise talked about, evidence-based practices combined with, and I agree with you, we have not spent a lot of time thinking about how we have described and articulated the background and the purpose for those programs will help us be more effective in moving this forward. Lou, I don't know if you have thoughts about that from your research and your survey.
That's what the Senate is talking about is tone, okay, and how the issue is addressed, and and context, tone and context. But facts. If you're going to work the system, your problem is inside the system with the people who run the system. They have very tough opinions about these things. Okay, the actual prosecutors, and why we have, and we're going to need prosecutors who can take a chance, as the DA just said. Most prosecutors did not get their jobs taking chances. Most DAs did not get elected pushing programs. Okay, you're going to need somebody to get elected who actually is willing to take the chance to reintroduce these kinds of programs, and that's why DA races are actually important and nobody pays attention. So first you got to get a hold of the politics of your local prosecutors, and then you may be able to have some influence on it. Nobody turns out on the DA side. B, we've got, I'm struck here. We have a DA, we have an AG running for governor of Massachusetts, and a candidate and a lieutenant governor whose credentials are justice credentials. Okay, we have two main contenders and where is crime in this gubernatorial debate? Okay, where is this discussion in the gubernatorial debate? So part of what groups like this and data like this have to do is actually raise this issue in the context of political debate and see which candidates are willing to grab it and go. All right, and maybe, I really have to say that, and I want to come back to realities. Rebuilding the prison system is going to be a major league a budget buster for a decade shortly. This will come up as soon as the economy levels out again. Okay, rebuilding these things. I think that's a great opportunity for change. Okay, in the classic historic swing of institutionalization and deinstitutionalization. So there's opportunity coming up. Okay, but you've got to get these issues on the political agenda.
Okay. I want to move on to the question of post-release supervision. Elise drew the distinction between early release on parole and general post-release supervision, and we now know that a relatively small percentage of offenders are going out on parole supervision when they've been released, quote-unquote, early on parole. But there have been proposals, and the public would support supervision for the highest, the offenders most likely to reoffend when they're out back in the community. There are benefits and detriments that might come with post-release supervision. I'd like to explore that a little bit. John, can I ask you first to talk a little bit about the benefits you might see with post-release supervision for all serious offenders?
Well, I think that and Elise presented the research, and there's a lot more out there, that we know how to do this. We, the larger corrections criminal justice community, understands what it means to appropriately and effectively manage offenders as they transition back to the community, and that it's not a lifelong assignment, that there's a risk period that's relatively short. There's a narrower group of folks to focus on. You don't look at all the numbers here of 20,000 people a year in Massachusetts. You don't have to look at all 20,000. I think Elise presented some data about the targeting of appropriate folks. So I think that's the good news. We know how to do it. The downside is that in the public discussion, it's difficult to encourage the system to say just focus on the high risk. Lou pointed out earlier, and I think Willie Horton again is an example, that if we look at just the high risk folks, we're going to have some failures. We'll have them if we look at everybody as well. But by just looking at the high risk folks, we're going to have some failures. That's going to be a difficult thing to explain. It's also easier to think, gee, if we include everybody, that means we're going to have some low-risk people here, and we can do some great things with them. But the math will show you that the low-risk people, by definition, commit fewer crimes. So if we focus on low-risk people, we're going to get a much lower return in terms of crime reduction, because they don't commit a lot of crime.
Okay. District Attorney Blatchett, your thoughts about potential benefits or detriments?
John and I have talked about this more than one occasion. All the empirical data I've seen strongly suggests and supports the idea that when someone is out on parole, use the dirty word that Senator Barrios used, because people don't understand what that means, their chance to modify the behavior is so greatly enhanced when they know that they have to do something, not just the random drug test, but report to somebody, communicate with somebody, have somebody work with them. And to me, it just makes such great sense. Taxpayers should embrace this. It saves money in the long run. It's something that will certainly help improve the chances of someone not reoffending. To me, it's just so logical to start to do this and think this way that I have nothing else that I can say about it. I mean, to me, I want to see it happen. I think we have to do that in the criminal justice system. And what Lou said's right. I think people in my profession are concerned about that one case that's going to blow up and maybe send us packing, but you have to have the courage, I think, to take that chance. If you really want to make a change in the criminal justice system, we have to catch up with the thinking of the public.
I'd also like to ask Rita if she could talk a little bit about post-release supervision. If I live in Weston, just to pick a community, release of offenders back into the community may have one implication. If I live in Codman Square, it may have very different implications.
They're coming back to Codman Square anyway. And I think that's something that people in Codman Square and Grove Hall know, is that these people are coming back, and that's where they're coming to. They're not coming to Weston, because your police will keep them out. But they're coming back to Grove Hall one way or another. And just as a practical matter, I'd like them back with supervision rather than without supervision. But I'm going to hijack this a little bit. I think that one of the things when you're talking about paradigm shifts and changing this disconnect between public perception and policymakers is that the rewards for each group are very different. And I don't think there are many rewards for policymakers who adopt this public perception. The rewards of changing to this kind of a system are long-term and very low level. And I think the losses are high profile and very immediate. And I think that most politicians and policymakers have to live on a 4-year schedule, 6-year schedule, 2-year schedule? Yeah. So I think that, and I don't think that you can, when you're talking evidence-based practice, you can demonstrate a lot in 2 to 4 years. And so I think that that's a huge problem. I think when you take this kind of change, you have to build in, I think what change analysts call big, quick hits for the long march. Mm-hmm. And I think that we know the outcomes of the long march, but I don't think there are a lot of quick hits in there that give policymakers and politicians something that they can say, I did this and it worked, it made your life safer. I don't think there's much out there that they can say in this. And I think that's a very, when you were talking about Melanie's law, which was passed, last week, and they were already talking about, let's see if this bill is a success, because now we had some people killed on the road this past weekend, and now they're going to be subject to Melanie's law. Wait a second, I thought the way we were going to evaluate whether this law worked was if fewer people died, not whether more people went to jail. And I think those two, the contrast between long-term evaluation and the quick hits, the political, is what's really killing this. I would like to see us begin to work on ways that we can give politicians and policymakers the quick hits so they can have something to work with.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I want to shift gears just a little bit and move to the second area we wanted to explore, and that's mandatory minimum sentences for drug cases. And as you saw in the survey results, 90% of the public say they want to that they're against mandatory minimum sentences. 76% that they say they want judges to have some latitude to impose mandatory treatment instead of a mandatory term of imprisonment. And they say they want us to focus more on drug treatment and rehabilitation rather than long sentences. If the goal is to reduce recidivism, and that's part of what we've just been talking about, what's the most effective way for us to achieve that? Talking about, and you've already suggested it, the issue of drugs and mandatory sentences, another area that's pretty provocative. It's like abortion, one of those issues that gets all of the political juices flowing. But it's an issue that's been debated for quite a while, and a number of you have been involved in those debates over the years here in Massachusetts. The DAs have been very active in this debate over mandatory minimum sentences. District Attorney, do you want to talk a little bit about the District Attorney's perspective?
The district attorneys, and this is the one issue that we probably don't have a lot of agreement on, but the district attorneys as a group are split on that position. I am not. I think the judges, for the most part, get it. 95% of the cases involving drug activity, the judges, I think, make the right call. I am not for mandatory minimums, with the caveat that I want to prosecute as aggressively as I can those persons who are charged with trafficking and distribution, but give the opportunity for those charged with possession to truly get the help they need. And I model my thoughts after what's being done in Brooklyn, New York, with District Attorney Charlie Hines, in which he's been very successful not prosecuting those persons who are either new to the system or have been charged with possession offenses. He has modeled his program after extended probation and or parole. It's not mamby-pamby in terms of the rehabilitation or the pain people go through in terms of getting treatment, but he allows persons, unless, and this is the caveat, unless they've been charged with an act of violence, with respect to drug cases, to get the opportunity to make that tough choice to get treatment. He's also been successful in working in a partnership, I understand, with Blue Cross and Blue Shield in New York to help get those persons who are charged with those offenses into significant and meaningful rehabilitation.
And the district attorneys who have opposed the elimination of the mandatory minimums, can you say a word about their thinking, the basis for their opposition?
That, unlike my position, which I think most judges get it, they believe most judges don't get it. And they believe that there has to be that in place to make sure that there's justice served.
Okay, thank you. Jack, you were involved in a lot of the discussions, particularly around the sentencing guidelines legislation. So you've had a perspective on the thinking behind it. You want to talk a little bit about your view? Yeah.
In my view, whenever we talk about organized rules for sentencing, we unfortunately always letting often prosecutors, but not necessarily always prosecutors and legislators, hijack the rules in order to apply them to their favorite worst case scenario. Every guideline range has to be tailored to match the most heinous armed robbery committed with a firearm in which someone was hurt and a lot of people were put in fear and some money was taken, or lots of money was taken. And I believe that's a byproduct of something I said before, which is this idea that there's a distrust in the system at every level. Legislators don't trust judges' discretion. Judges don't trust parole officials' discretion. The only offer I can make of some solution is the more of these kinds of debates happen and the more people take a sort of a beginning-to-end approach to this thing and see it working, the better off we'll be. A comment about the process, though, that comes to mind just from today's paper. In this morning's Globe, we read about the ever-increasing rate of shooting crimes and gun violence in Massachusetts. And we saw that the United States Attorney's Office is going to get involved. And you and I both remember, Bob, deja vu all over again.
Right.
This happened in the late 80s. The United States Attorney's Office got involved. They applied what at the time were viewed as very severe mandatory minimum penalties, which by now look light. There was a 15-year sentence, automatic, for someone committing a crime with a firearm. The reaction of law enforcement authorities is often the first arrow in the quiver is let's apply the mandatory minimum sentencing. I have to say that I think in the late 80s it did have effect, but what we may be seeing now is the unintended consequence, or the consequence that wasn't anticipated. Many of those people are back on the street, and no one's really thinking about the preventive aspects of sentencing policy. So here we see in the Boston Globe this morning bringing the same old reaction to the problem.
In addition to this morning's Globe, I believe I heard this morning coming in on WBZ Radio a story about, and I believe this is national data, but generally that sentencing in the country is getting longer. So that would seem to fit with that trend. It seems to go against the direction in which these findings are suggesting. Senator, how do you see us engage in this debate?
Thank you. You saw me sort of moving over here like I wanted to say something.
I was going to ask you anyway, but
I think we have to connect the two subjects today. We have to connect the recidivism issue to mandatory minimums, because in this, my humble opinion, the single biggest class of cases of incarcerated individuals that I think we're scratching our heads about recidivism and bad policy are folks in on drug mandatory minimum sentences. And why is that? Well, because when you're in on a mandatory minimum, I'll give you the example, and you're up in Billerica serving a 2-year sentence. You're not allowed to participate in any of the work release programs because you're in on a mandatory minimum. You have no incentive because you're in on a mandatory minimum to do any of the other programming offered to help get you ready to go back on the street. And then you wrap up your sentence and you're back on the street with no support. Right? It's like a recipe for reoffending. Sorry.
That wasn't a knee-jerk reaction.
Was it yes or agreeing or disagreeing? But the point is, when you look at the data, and I think the statistic that Elise cited was 40% in the state system are back in within 3 years. I know that the statistic that we were working with on the Harshbarger Commission was actually more than 40%. It was like 66% are back in, and maybe that's when you factor in folks in county facilities. But the point is, a lot of folks are going right back to jail. And I think if you look at the subset that are drug-related offenses, I think it can be, where there's no post-sentence support, it's even higher. And so we know something, and evidence-based practices, or no evidence-based practices, just plain logic will tell us that this class of individuals is crying out for treatment, right? If there's anybody that should, and it's precisely this class that's not getting it because of the way the mandatory minimum works while in prison and when they come out.
Do you see the opportunity for somehow beginning the discussion that would help change people's thinking, the public's thinking? Not the public seems to be with us, but you raised a good point about they're with us in some ways but not in others. How do we change that thinking so that when the legislature is looking at proposals, whether it's for further mandatory sentences or the sentencing legislation now before the legislature.
For how many years now?
Many years.
10 years?
At least 10 years. The sentencing bill.
It was 95, 94?
Well, the sentencing bill since 95. And the federal sentencing bill, by the way, not to offer that as any model, took 17 years to pass.
Okay, so we've still
but not as a model for Massachusetts. So I'm sorry, Bob, the question then
So
was,
how do we begin to form a level of support if we agree that the type of treatment you're proposing is what's more effective?
Our biggest challenge is what Mr. DiNatale said earlier, which is that this is not a priority in the public right now. There are many more high-profile issues, and where you can only make mistakes by doing this, right? Because it's the one bad case that gets brought up. It's to a risk-averse legislature. It's going to be hard to get this a priority, though, and I think the way it becomes a priority is by stressing the cost impacts of the short-sighted nature of our current policy, as well as, frankly, urban legislators. This is my political assessment. Urban legislators myself, they're coming back to my neighborhood, and so I'm willing to get really passionate about it, right? I live, 2 blocks down from one of the largest public housing developments, where there are a lot of folks coming back, to Cambridge here. And so I'm willing to talk about it. Marie St. Fleur is willing to talk about it. I mean, there are a lot of us who understand and care about the issue can. But to get our suburban colleagues, I think in tough fiscal times, we have to make the cases of cost savings and sort of talk about these evidence-based practices, not believing the facts about recidivism will change their mind, but the numbers behind will make it more of a priority.
If I could just quickly echo that, if we can all agree, as panelists and members of the audience today, that the biggest component of our population in prisons and jails are those who are alcohol and drug addicted, that's where we take the first bite. That's how we can be cost effective in changing our thinking. No, I think it's a broad sweeping brush with respect to, say, sexually dangerous persons, youthful offenders, acts of violence. That's not something that we're going to see happen anytime soon in terms of I guess, changing or what we do with those persons, and perhaps we shouldn't. But if we can agree that the start is, again, with those persons addled with those substance abuse addictions, those persons who make up the biggest part of our prison population, then we can go forward. We can make that start. We can make that case. We can talk about cost effectiveness. We can talk about breaking the cycle.
John, your organization runs programs that actually implements this at a community level every day. We all know the challenges you face when you try to open a program in a community, but you've been remarkably successful at being able to do that and get a community that may have initially been in opposition to what you're trying to do to become supportive of your efforts. Do you have thoughts about how we engage this discussion starting at a community level?
I was encouraged when Lou said that there's a growth opportunity coming here for community programs. So we'll get working on that. I take exception, though, that we've been successful in getting community support. We get community support after we've been in operation for about 10 or 15 years. The opposition starts to die away after about 5 years. After about 10 years, they come to our holiday gatherings with the offenders and mix freely. Quick story, I'll tell you. We had a program in the South End, and building wasn't just right, so there was an opportunity to move into a building that the Department of Correction had operated as a pre-release facility over on the Fenway, and so we thought, well, the zoning's not a question, so let's not make a big deal of this. We'll go in very quietly. And literally, we moved in the dark of night during a snowstorm in December. I remember standing in there and the last guy sort of wandering back across the Fenway area as the snow's coming down. One of my staff was sitting on the sidewalk, and this elderly woman comes by, and she said, "What's going on?" Sees all this activity of moving trucks and people coming in a building that had been empty for a long time. And with some trepidation, he said, "Well, this is going to be a halfway house for men coming out of the Suffolk County House of Correction," expecting a very explosive reaction. And the woman's response was, "Oh, that's great. I thought it was going to be a condo." Kathy Dennehy is here. I want to thank the Department of Correction, because for 15 years, the department did good community service in that neighborhood and won the support of that neighborhood. Now, we, at our old location, we reached a peaceful place with the neighborhood. They never turned out in droves in our support, but we were at a peaceful place. That's a very difficult thing for any organization, is to cite a community program. Maureen Walsh can tell you the story in Mattapan of just simply renaming a parole field office to a regional reentry center, and the visceral reaction that gets. So the public opinion is great. I wonder if it's more of the people in Weston who are saying that this is a wonderful thing. We have to do community programs to reduce recidivism because they know that it's not where the folks come. It's a very difficult thing to do. We work at it hard. We try to demonstrate by the work we do at each of our locations and hope that people where we are thinking about going will look at that to see if to prove that we can do it the right way.
We want to get to the questions that I'm sure folks in the audience have. Before we do that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists if they'd like to make a final comment, maybe talking about where we go from here. So why don't I begin with the Senator and ask you if you'd like to make a brief closing statement.
Actually, I think we've discussed it well enough. I would just note that as we think about policy changes, understanding the way in which policy and politics are interacting with one another, and that includes, of course, public opinion and not just what the public thinks, but how intensely they feel it, which was, I think, Mr. DiNatale's point, is going to help get us where we need to go. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. Thank you.
Usually the prosecution goes last, but I will, as you guys understand, we have to do a better job convincing the public there is a real cost savings to changing our way of thinking and doing business. And when we're successful doing that, change will come.
I've really been struck by the issue of trust that was mentioned earlier. Legislators don't trust the judges don't. But I think that's what we need to develop, is a sense of trust between the stakeholders in this. I mean, I think that a politician ought to be able to trust that when they make complicated, difficult decisions that will have positive outcomes in the long run, that their community will support that. So I think that there's a lot of work that we have to do about trusting each different segment, and the only way I can see to do that is to work with them and to sometimes you have to trust but verify, but you have to trust people first. And I think that it's amazing to me that as a resident of Roxbury, I can pick up the phone and call the district attorney. And I know him and by his first name, and that's amazing to me. That's not something I expected. But that will help him eventually get through some of the tough times he's going to face when some of his decisions don't turn out so well. So I think working on that community, political, policymaker trust is really critical.
Same theme. I think we have to equip legislators with the armor to sort of leave that private conversation in their office when they say, you know, I really don't want to have to go out there and vote for yet another mandatory bill, and then go out there and equip them in public to say why it's not a good idea. And that involves prosecutors saying there are alternatives, community leaders saying there are alternatives, business leaders saying there are alternatives, making them comfortable with the idea that they're not going to get whacked in the globe tomorrow if they don't vote for the latest mandatory bill.
I think the DA's got it. In fact, there may be a generational opportunity. You know, each generation decriminalizes certain laws. I mean, alcohol, vices, gambling, all been decriminalized over the last few years. Drugs are on that overall, particularly certain kinds of drugs are on that overall path of generational acceptance, and the edge, the fear, crack fear, the fear of is edging off because the population is familiar with this and so I think there are a couple of large-scale trends that are emerging. One, the dilapidated condition of the prisons and the costs that are going to be associated with keeping these number of people incarcerated over time. The fact that the number of people incarcerated is in an area that's really more of a personal use area that's been more along the lines of old generational vices that'll probably, the edge will come off over time, and I think you will find enough courageous political leaders to step in there and try and turn this, a piece of this anywhere, into a health care issue rather than an imprisonment issue.
Sometimes I think the crime policy discussions come down to that debate about great taste, less filling. That the concern about whether you're soft on crime because you're into treatment programs and good recidivism reduction efforts versus tough on crime because you're interested in punishment. I think as we design these programs and in these policies and laws, need to be sure that we're satisfying that punishment requirement, because there's nothing about what we do with good reentry programs that doesn't include some sort of custodial element, loss of liberties, loss of privileges. We need to be sure that people are comfortable with that. Finally, I'd like to thank Elise Clausen and Cheryl Roberts and the Crime and Justice Institute for the good work that they've done on behalf of our organization.
We do have some time for questions from the audience, questions and comments. We have microphones here available.
I wanted to ask about a two-part question. One, about programs that have been successful in other places in either supervised post-release supervision or some of the suggestions that we've discussed here today, and also what does that mean in terms of resource allocation?
I will take a shot at it, although the experts are here in the audience. Elise Clausen and the Crime and Justice Institute are doing that kind of work in a couple of states around the country. And I think the simple answer is that we can't say that a halfway house is the effective response and that a day reporting center is not an effective response, but it's how you build that particular program. We know how to do it. There is good evidence about what kinds of treatment services, what kinds of activities, how you structure it, how you deliver it, who the staff should be, and what kinds of offenders you target in order to reduce recidivism and have a safe operated program. So the good news is we know how to do it. The difficulty is it's labor intensive, and people here can talk about the amount of effort it takes to move an agency, not just to mechanically be able to do it, but to think of it philosophically as this is what we're all about. This is how we're going to measure ourselves and move our whole organization to that kind of service delivery.
Bob, I want to just give another quick example. One of the points that Elise Clausen made was that it's not just enough about, it's not treatment, but it's targeted treatment. I think she said it was 3 or 4 of the major contributing factors to that particular offense, or the sort of likelihood for reoffense. I think one of the very interesting and successful programs, hasn't been around that long, about 5 or 6 years now, is a program targeting sex offenders I think it's based out of Framingham, and Maureen would know, Framingham or Marlborough. The Intensive Program for Sex Offenders, IPSO, which has been highly successful by targeting in its treatment the particular risk factors for folks at reoffending or sex offenders. And that is, I think, one of the reasons I was able to persuade my colleagues in the Senate budget last year to expand it statewide, because we had evidence on a very issue. This is an issue from a public policy perspective. People do get, well, crime might be down here. When you talk about sex offenders, boy, they really do still care about that. And we were able to, I think, persuasively advocate for the expansion of the budget on this particular issue, because we had a program that had been tried out. It had been on, Maureen, correct me, it's 5 or 6 years? 5 or 6 years. And it worked. And I think that's a great example that goes to how we successfully can achieve these things politically.
Okay, thank you. Is there a question back here? Yes.
Thank you. Okay. I guess one thing I wanted to mention is I think the folks who have said that public safety is a very emotional issue are right. All you have to do is look at the rhetoric about the war on terror and the war in Iraq to realize nationally what people are willing to invest in, even when they're not sure it's working, just to be safe. I guess I want to ask the question: who are the folks, or what is the interest? Who are the interests that are in favor of lock 'em up? Is it more of an ideologically bound group, or is it somebody with an economic interest, or who are the folks that are going to be opposing us, and what are their interests in maintaining the system as it is or building more prisons?
Jack?
I don't think the interests are nefarious. I mean, remember, lock them up to some extent works. It's just a half a solution. I mean, it's specific deterrence that actually takes a person off the street, and that's what I was trying to refer to earlier, that I think in the 90s that approach did have an immediate impact in gun violence in Boston. I think the issue is more that political leaders are not willing or are afraid to look over their shoulder and find some interest group decrying their decision to take the longer view. And that's why I think organizing community, business, civic leaders, convincing legislators that there won't be someone bearing down their neck if they take the view that the senator has described and others, that there's more to it than just lock them up. It's just easier to take that half approach.
Lou, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you've got an in Massachusetts, there is an ideological component to lock them up. It's conservative, political. It's probably around 25% of the electorate that doesn't want to hear anything about it. Just lock them up. But what you have to, but your real oppositions are folks that are majorities of opportunity that spike around incidents, and those are middle class voters. Okay, across the spectrum, not upper class voters, not working class voters, but middle class voters. Middle class voters' voting tendencies tend to be driven by fear. Okay, and over time, over history, it's fear that'll drive your undecided middle class voter, and so that's the target. It's a very soft target. It's very easy for demagogues to drop in on top of that target, and drive them in one direction or the other, and that's where you have to knit this thing together at a much tighter level at the community level. How you have to tighten that, otherwise it just flows and it just overcomes the true political opposition to it.
I think Rita also wanted to respond.
I think this is one of those pogo moments. We've seen the enemy and it is us. I think on any given day, any one of us makes that transition. I'm for this generally, but not in my neighborhood, not on this day, not about this issue. So I think that the building the community organizations and support so that people can get beyond that moment. Because you ask me tomorrow when something else happens in my neighborhood, I might have a different opinion.
You have a question here?
One of the challenges that we're really confronting is how do we build in the community that you're all talking about? Because it's really the second piece of the puzzle. When people go to prison, when people go to the criminal justice system, they're brought to the bar of justice and society asks them for a response, and the response is incarceration. However, how do we bring them back to the community and also build the infrastructure in the community? And I think that's the challenge that we're facing. I know the Council and State Government has offered a model that suggests that if we begin to make some of the structural infrastructure changes in the criminal justice system, we can use that savings, if you will, that would be over time, and it would be a long-term investment, back into infrastructure development within the communities where people are coming back to. Is that something that you see as viable? Is that one of the ways to engage in this discussion in a responsible way?
Jack, do you want to take it?
Well, Lou mentioned that he thought that this was going to come to a head when the economy levels off and the cost of rebuilding prisons is in front of us. I'm reminded of Tom Finneran, who many people have different opinions of, but one consistent opinion was a vigilant watch on the state pocketbook. And he was for alternatives to incarceration. I don't think we could never build a consensus around that core of support in the legislature. But I think the point you make about this being an opportunity to free up resources for other needs is certainly a point that can be driven home. How you drive it home. Anybody else want to try?
Senator, there is an opportunity cost here that projects that legislators would like to fund and support, we're not able to do that because of what we have to pay for incarceration. Do you have a sense of that feeling more broadly in the legislature, that there's an awareness of that?
Specific to the sort of fiduciary or the financial aspect.
Right. Yes.
Of, I think that in general, everybody that comes to the legislature with a new idea to lobby for something that's going to cost some money, there's always a component of the argument which says, but this is actually going to save money in the long run. So one can't imagine that we are the only advocates for an issue where that argument is being made. And so there's a certain level of, I think, healthy skepticism about anybody that claims that. Now, I do believe there's a lot of evidence that in this case, and perhaps more importantly, the large percentage of our budget that is spent on corrections perhaps is to me the strongest financial argument. It's not just that we are going to argue like everybody else that we're going to save money by instituting this, save money in the long run, but that this is, I think, other than sort of Medicaid-related programs, this is the largest single budget item in the state budget, right? More than we spend on education. The state spends on higher education. It's huge. So separating out, post-ed reform, separating out K-12 education investment and Medicaid-related reimbursement stuff, which is really federal dollars. This is the most expensive, the third most expensive. That should be something which I think we can focus on in terms of cost savings. That's I think your hook, and I think the people that need to lead it, the leaders of this can't just be the folks, the usual suspects. I think it has to be our fiscal watchdogs, the Ways and Means folks, the folks that are concerned about the opportunity cost, as you described it, what we're giving up by not doing this.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Jack, it's great to see you, although you've been behind a pole most of this for me. On the 22nd of this month, the Judiciary Committee is going to have their hearing on all the sentencing bills. For those who are not aware of that, I just want to point it out. It's a practical way to weigh in on some of the concerns that have been expressed in this conference and in others. I would make this observation, I think of you, John, in this respect. There has been this whole idea of sentencing guidelines reforms that revolve around mitigating the mandatories. There's been a lot of work done within the building to try to get that to yes. And one way to do it is to acknowledge that each of the players, the politics of it are each of the players have a major role that can affect whether or not you get consensus. For example, the DA's Association has been great in acknowledging that there are some ways they can move on mandatories, even though everybody agrees that the reason why mandatories from the DA's perspective is so valuable is that, in fact, it is great leverage for them. And they would never admit that they use it for any other reason than honorable reasons. Now, the fact is that the net result is that there are a lot of people in prison who are first offenders serving 10-year sentences. So at some level, that argument breaks down. But the point is that if the DAs took on November 22nd the bold stand to say that we're prepared to accept something less than the current system in order to achieve a greater good, which is reduction in crime, then that's going to help. Otherwise, they're the tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield, the politics. I would make another observation. I do a lot of work nationally with the Council of State Governments, and it's amazing how the politics gets diffused over the money. Senator Barrett's made a point. I couldn't agree more. Think of this for just a minute. Sam Brownback of Kansas and Joe Biden of Delaware are the joint sponsors of the reentry initiatives that is going to bring $100 billion to the states. Now, if they could agree on that, we ought to be in Massachusetts able to move the ball forward. And I would just suggest, again, as a practical matter, there needs to be, the voices in this room need to be in the Judiciary Committee meeting at that hearing to speak to your experiences and to encourage, because there's good legislation that is pending that deals with both post-release supervision, the mandatory part of it with Lieutenant Governor Healy wants, but it's combined with things like getting guidelines to eliminate mandatories for the school zone cases when you get people with no records being caught up in this, and parole eligibility for mandatories, even retroactive. Those kinds of things are out there. There is an opportunity to make it move, get it to go forward. But I'll just leave you with one last observation. If it's not done right, it can really blow up quickly. The last time the sentencing bill came before the House, there was a feeding frenzy of amendments that made each of the sentences and the ranges worse. And no one was prepared to vote against them. And and so you have to stop that from happening. The way you do it is you get everybody in this room, the DAs, the defense lawyers, the ones in the community, the ones who have done the work and know the empirical evidence supports reduction in crime arguments, all saying the same thing, which is change the system by including these elements. And you actually will. I think you actually will get success if it's done that way.
Again, the date for that hearing.
It's at 11 o'clock on November 22nd. I apologize, I don't know the room number, but it's most likely in either the B or A1 or B1. But it's Judiciary
What's the easiest
Committee.
way for folks to find out the location?
Just call 722-2000, which is the general number for the House of Representatives, or actually the State House, I think, and they'll let you know. But it is that's a very big date because this stuff is very exciting. We're talking about, but in the end, if we're going to change the law, then we need to convince, at least in the first step, the Judiciary Committee, that there's some soundness in the approaches that have been talked about today.
Terrific. Thank you. I think there's a question in the back.
Oh, thanks. Hi. One of the political hot potatoes coming before the legislature is reform of criminal offender record information, which is part of the reentry quagmire. I was wondering if, Jack, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, you would suggest a strategy for legislators to come out and say, yes, some kind of reform of some of that legislation is necessary because without it, housing, much less jobs, is just inaccessible for about 2.6 million Corey holders in Massachusetts. I know Senator Barrios has ideas on that, too. I'd like to hear what you think and a strategy that might be effective.
It's cinque grana, by the way. It's not an easy one. Lately in my work life, I deal with lots of employers and people who are on the other side of that issue, who are in favor of even more open access to Corey information. Truthfully, I have a hard time telling you how I think that pendulum can go back. I don't know if the senator does. I think the trends that I'm aware of are in favor of ever more disclosure along the lines of these sex offender registries, which, in my mind, have raised lots of privacy concerns, which unfortunately the courts have not enforced.
This was actually the subject of a panel that a number of us here present, both in the audience and up here, were active in, participated in a few months ago. There are clearly both legislative and, I think, regulatory efforts or conversations about reforming at the legislative and regulatory level. A couple of things that are being talked about, and Lisa, I think you know most of these, but some of the other people in the audience might not be aware of. One, while we do have relatively and increasingly easy access to the records, the records are both hard to read and there are also really no regulations about training people to understand what it is they're reading. And so you might have a charge which has been dismissed. The person doesn't know how to see that, and they see that, oh gosh, larceny by check, and this bad person, we're not hiring them. It was dismissed. So that kind of training aspect is a piece of it, but also so putting some responsibility on folks who want to access the records is something. I want to highlight, though, Lisa, something you didn't ask, but connected to it, because separate and apart from the actual CORI, the Criminal History Systems Board, and what they're doing and what we're doing legislatively to direct them, I think it's important to remember that district attorneys and police also have a role to play here. The District Attorney Blodgett and a couple of other district attorneys, but in particular District Attorney Blodgett has been very, very, I think, courageous in really creating and expanding a diversion program for youthful offenders, folks sort of beyond the statutory required age of 16, 17 to 24 or 25-year-olds, 24-year-olds, which will allow folks, if the police have to be on board with it, so you form a partnership with the police, and if you're a first or second-time nonviolent offender, maybe a drug crime or something else nonviolent, and you agree to meet with, the certain criteria, participating in what is in effect probation, but it's pre-trial. In fact, it's pre-arraignment, so there's no CORI. There's nothing on your CORI if you successfully complete the terms of this probation-like, pre-probation diversion program. That is, and it's necessary and important in this way because there's no CORI at the end of it. But it's not those kind of ideas, especially for first or second-time nonviolent offenders. it's not widespread enough. But there's a lot of good ideas out there that are being experimented on, I think, that provide hope, separate from the hope that we can reform through the Criminal History Systems Board and what they're doing.
Thank you. We're getting very close to the time to complete the program for this morning. I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for being here today. I think we've heard some extremely important information through the work that Elise presented to us, through the survey and the research data, and hopefully it continues to fuel this discussion and this debate. As you've also heard, there were opportunities coming up for both the folks who are here on the panel as well as the organizations represented and you here in the audience to be part of this discussion and debate to help us focus on these issues and to help make our communities safer. Both the Crime and Justice Foundation or Crime and Justice Institute, the Boston Foundation, I know Community Resources for Justice, and all of the organizations are going to continue to work on this, to take the survey results and to continue to work with our legislators and policymakers to, again, get this on the public's agenda for discussion and to look at ways in which we can improve the system. So, again, I want to thank all of you for being here, particularly the number of key policymakers who work in various agencies in state government, the commissioner from the parole board, the commissioner from the Department of Corrections, chairman of the parole board, members of the parole board. I believe I saw Jane Tewksbury here from the Department of Youth Services, legislators. Thanks to all of you for joining us this morning. I want to give special thanks to our terrific panel who did a terrific job. Thank you for your insights. And it would not have happened without the tremendous work and help from folks from the Crime and Justice Institute and the Boston Foundation. Cheryl Roberts, Elise Clausen, Richard Ward, everybody who has really worked hard to make today's event such a success. And again, thanks to each and every one of you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.